Welcome, I'm Sean Spazzato, and this is Inside the Magic's Fallen Attractions Flashback, where we take a look back at some of the world's greatest attractions that used to exist at some of the world's greatest theme parks. On today's episode, we're going to talk about an attraction that used to exist at one of my favorite theme parks in the world. I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and I am obsessed with everything Walt Disney World. It is essentially where I encountered my first theme park ever, Magic Kingdom, and it is also just a place I love to go and be with friends, and some of the greatest memories I've ever experienced in my life have occurred at these theme parks. Anyway, today I'm going to be talking about an attraction that used to be famous for shrinking its guests before taking them on an adventure inside of a human body. If you haven't guessed which attraction I'm talking about Body Wars. Body Wars used to exist at Epcot. It was a simulator ride that was closed back in January of 2007, along with all of the other attractions that used to exist in the Wonders of Life Pavilion. For those of you who are familiar with Star Tours at Hollywood Studios, this ride was kind of identical, only Star Tours takes guests on a journey to a galaxy far, far away, while Body Wars would take guests on a gruesome and bumpy ride inside of a human body. This definitely wasn't the ride you wanted to get on after a Mickey bar or two, if you catch my drift. This ride stems back all the way to Walt Disney himself. Walt had a fascination with miniatures, and during the time of when the Monsanto House of the Future attraction was coming up for a rework at Disneyland, Walt had been approached by the lead engineer at the Monsanto Chemical Company, Dr. Charles Allen Thomas. Now, Dr. Charles Allen Thomas had approached Walt with this new idea for an attraction that would take guests on a journey inside the human body. Now, this actually inspired an attraction later with the working title of Microworld. Now, Microworld centered around the idea of taking guests inside the world of a snowflake. This idea of Microworld ended up becoming Adventure Through Inner Space. With this attraction, guests would journey on pods through the ride until they got smaller and smaller, until they eventually got to the point where they could see the atoms of oxygen and hydrogen, which make up the water in a snowflake. This attraction opened officially in 1967. Adventure Through Inner Space was a fairly popular attraction at Disneyland. It actually existed in the park for over 20 years. Now, of course, this was around the time of the late 1980s, and guests had kind of been more interested in outer space than inner space. Now, if you kind of pick up where I'm going with this led to the creation of Star Tours. Star Tours opened to a massive amount of popularity. And also, not only was this ride very popular, but it was also extremely advanced for its time. This made Imagineers want to go back to the drawing board and think about what they could do with this technology. And it actually sparked some ideas of them going even farther back in the past to the ideas of Walt's and Dr. Charles Allen Thomas's. The idea of taking guests on a journey through inner space, which of course led to Body Wars. Body Wars later opened in 1989 at Epcot, only 22 months after Star Tours opened at Disneyland in California. Body Wars began in the queue, located at the Met Labs, the Miniaturized Exploration Technology Labs. Met was also a reference to the official sponsor of the attraction and the Wonders of Life Pavilion, MetLife Insurance. Now, this company wasn't only responsible for the creation of both the attraction and the Wonders of Life Pavilion, but this company was also partially responsible for the closing of both the attraction and the pavilion. Now, we'll get to that just a little bit later.
Congratulations on becoming part of our miniaturization program. We're sure that you'll be amazed by your mission into the body, and we hope that you enjoy and learn from our.
The Met Labs was also where guests would watch videos discussing the different levels of dermatopic purification they must go through before entering the body probe vehicle. This was also where guests would get a little lesson of what was to come on the ride from the chief scientist at the Miniaturization Center. One might also assume that the video might contain a small cameo from Captain Picard offering some life-changing advice. If you take a look at some of this footage, it's extremely reminiscent of the USS Enterprise from Star Trek. Just saying. Then guests would join the probe's captain, Captain Jack Braddock, who would take you on a medical mission aboard the Bravo 229. The mission was to meet up with and collect a doctor who was already on her own mission to study a splinter inside of a patient's body. It's funny, you would think on this incredible journey inside of a human body, you would study something a little bit more captivating than a small splinter, something that's generally removed by a small pair of tweezers. Just saying. This was when guests would enter the ride vehicle. Once guests were on board, the Bravo 229 would be moved to a miniaturization room where technicians focused a particle reducer on the ship.
2, 1, hold on everybody.
This process would shrink an approximately 26-ton ship down to about the weight of a drop of water. If only this particle reducer existed in real life, maybe I could get back into some of my old skinny jeans. Next, the ship would be sent under the subject's skin to meet up with Dr. Cynthia Lair, the doctor studying the splinter. Dr. Lair would be taking a cell count when suddenly she would get pulled into a capillary. This is when the real ride began. Guests would be taken on a bumpy and wild rescue mission to help save Dr. Lair as riders followed her inside unauthorized areas. These unauthorized areas included a vein, regions past the heart, and right ventricle. Riders even got to enter into the lungs, where Dr. Lair would get attacked by a white blood cell. This portion of the ride was when the motion of the room would become extremely forceful to simulate the fast movement of the lungs, which takes place when you breathe. I rode this attraction a very long time ago, maybe when I was in 6th or 7th grade, and I remember this portion of the ride being extremely violent, almost to the point where I would assume my own lungs might stop. Here was when the captain used the probe's lasers to save the doctor. Because of the use of the lasers, the ship would become low on power. The doctor would then suggest using the brain's energy to recharge the ship. Guests would then travel past the heart's left atrium and into an artery to get to the brain, which of course led to another bumpy and wild ride.
5%. I'm gonna use the heartbeat to propel us. Ready? Now!
After a neuron would contact the vessel, causing the ship to regain its charge, the probe would then deminiaturize outside of the body. Body Wars consisted mainly of a video played inside a moving simulator. The video for the ride was actually directed by the famous director and actor Leonard Nimoy. The film was created with the use of computer graphics and special effects film techniques. In fact, because the film was being shown inside a moving theater, they actually had to create a set capable of moving entirely by itself while they were filming. And this set was capable of rocking and moving around during filming to match the movement of the simulator. Each probe held up to 40 guests. The ride was created with the same technology found in its sister attraction, Star Tours, in both Disneyland and at Hollywood Studios. This technology was known as ATLAS, which stood for Advanced Technology Leisure Application Simulator. This was actually created by the military, which they would use for their own simulators to train their own soldiers and pilots.
We need an energy boost.
The brain, it works on electrical impulse.
How do we get there?
Through that capillary.
Now, like any theme park attraction since the beginning of time, this ride did face criticism. The ride's motion had been developed by an Imagineer who had sat inside the ride vehicle and watched its film repetitively while moving a joystick to convey movement. This process was how the ride was synchronized to the film. Now, during this attraction's lifetime, many people had become sick while riding this ride, and a lot of people thought it was not only because of the ride's gooey imagery, but also because of its intense roughness. Another issue this ride would face was when it would slip out of synchronization. So imagine sitting in a room where the room is actually moving in one direction and the screen you're watching in front of you is moving in another. Actually, don't imagine that. I don't have any sick bags to pass out. The inside of the cabin was always monitored during ride operations to make sure no guest would feel discomfort during the simulation. And if a guest was spotted looking sick or ill, the attraction could be immediately shut down. Unfortunately, ride operators couldn't always get to guests fast enough in these situations, and well, yeah. The Body Wars attraction had originally opened to massive hour-plus wait time, but over time had transitioned to more of a walk-on attraction. Some have said another reason for the ride losing some of its popularity came from Hollywood Studios' Star Tours, which opened only 2 months after Body Wars had. Star Tours was an identical attraction without gory images and a much smoother ride. What can you say? More guests wanted to travel across the galaxy than across the respiratory system. Because of all the issues of Body Wars' roughness and gory images, new riders stopped coming in the door of the attraction. In fact, the attraction would often run with maybe 1 or 2 riders at a time. Mind you, this was a 40-person ride with multiple ride units. Since the opening of Body Wars and the Wonders of Life Pavilion, both of these attractions had always been sponsored by MetLife Insurance, but by 2001, this was no longer the case. In 2004, the Wonders of Life Pavilion switched to seasonal operation, where the pavilion was only open during forecasted heavy attendance times. Some of these times included spring break, summer, and the weeks around Christmas. At this point, the attractions within the pavilion had stopped receiving any updates, and the building started to become reminiscent of the 1980s, which of course was the time of when it was actually built. In January of 2007, the Wonders of Life Pavilion was officially closed. Later in 2007, the pavilion had been reopened but repurposed, as it became the festival center for Epcot's International Food and Wine Festival. The renovation included areas for culinary demos, wine tastings, guest speakers, and other offerings. Today, the pavilion can now be considered a multi-purpose event building, as it is also used for the Flower and Garden Festival and the Festival of the Arts. I have to say, the final nail in this graphic and bumpy coffin has to be when MetLife Insurance dropped its sponsorship of both the attraction and the Wonders of Life Pavilion. When MetLife had originally signed on as the attraction sponsor, the agreement made it so Body Wars and also the entire pavilion would receive updates over the lifetime of the building. After MetLife pulled out, they didn't only sabotage the existence of Body Wars, but also all of the attractions within the Wonder of Life Pavilion. MetLife really did pull the plug on not only the life of Body Wars, but also the entire pavilion. It's unfortunate because I do believe if this attraction had maybe received updates of maybe making it not so rough, including less gooier images, I do believe this attraction in some form could still exist to this day. Because this attraction lost its funding, this couldn't even be an option anymore. Well, there you have it, a look back at one of Epcot's fallen attractions. Thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside the Magic's Fallen Attractions Flashback. And if you could, please comment below any ideas for any future episodes. It can be any attraction from any theme park around the world. See you guys next time.